Freddie, fame.
Yo, I'm the lyrical swordsman, decapitating bitches with my linguistics so vicious yet mystic. Witnesses go ballistic. My craft is worked on effectively. I'm confident when I attack, it's irreversible like hysterectomies. Don't mess with me unless you want your life to lose value like ancient house's equity. In my hood, pedestrians beg for food. Some of y'all thinking filet mignon, but baking soda's significant in that recipe. Pseudonymous moms and cathedrals emphasizing creeds for the sons incarcerated, trying to cop a plea, trying to maintain a balance in this reality. Who end up popping guns like 63 progressing teens. Gangsters in the streets remind me of Bob Marley, but not only are they shooting sheriffs but also deputies. I'm not a participator, just a narrator looking for greater potency and X amount of ganja weed.
We here to bring money and to bring change. They here to cause confusion. If this was chess, we'd be yelling checkmate 3 years ago, because we've been beat these. It's not a
game. All right, again, and shalom and salamta. As always, this is Lidj Yefdeyah, Yohannes, Wolde, Amanuel, and sealing up our third installment and probably the final piece here for this language study or linguistical study, and really more so sealing up the process for ones to really gain some grounds in having a firm understanding of the naming system as per the East, or the Eastern realms, the Eastern lands, more so in the Eastern Hemisphere, as ones would, of course, come to that in their studies, especially, with so many of, ones of our affinity, especially amongst Rastafari, Ethiopian Hebrews, Black Jews, so on and so forth, of that nature. It's, been an interesting study, just to say the least, to bring this forward for ones, and going over some of my own older notes, and really reorganizing them to the point to where I can actually disseminate them in a point that, I can be the most understood and comprehensive to ones who are probably coming into something of this effect for the first time. So it's, been interesting, and so to speak, as though I might be sitting in a position that may seem as though I'm a teacher. I'm still learning more than I am teaching, so to that effect. But again, we've come through, of course, the naming system of the Arabic, as well as the Hebrew from our second installment. And of course, just hearing the phonetics between these quote-unquote Semitic languages, you kind of see the cord that binds them together, and more so the tonal and phonetic, linguistic sounds, and even so, if you're viewing this here on YouTube, of course, or any other platform, you also kind of see the similarity in the writing system as well, where the letters of the alphabet, if you please, of most of these Semitic languages is continuously similar, just showing a simile between all three languages that we're focusing on here. So, and please forgive me if I might have misspelled a few words, even from the English, on some of the previous studies. Just please, cut I some slack. We're dealing with 4 languages here, so I tend to even do that a lot when I'm speaking, trying to retain and rehash and reuse as much of each of the languages as I can, and as I mentioned, not so to just put myself in the teacher position, because I'm still a student as so myself, just another study buddy, just keeping notes with you, so just to keep that in mind. for ones to really, just gain a little more grounds on that. But of course, we've come to the fulfillment here and the pinnacle, we would say, in our studies as Rastafari, Ethiopian Hebrews, Black Jews, Judeo-Christians, so on and so forth. But really, this is the crux, of the matter in this study, because this is pretty much what many of ones of our respective circles have really sought to get to, have really sought out from, I can't say how long, but, most ones still studying themselves, even to this very moment, gaining most of the grounds that they can. And I've even mentioned to many ones as well, if you have a good firm groundation in either the Arabic or the Hebrew, if you've been studying those two languages from a certain, a good amount of time, maybe a year, 2 or 3 years or so, and you're checking out most of the information that has been put out on those specific languages, I mean, you're pretty much halfway there in learning a lot of the Ethiopic languages, especially the Amharic. So just to really put that out there for ones and have that as a footnote and, of course, just a little side piece to the lesson here. Ones will hopefully not be too dismayed if, they start to come across the Amharic and try to learn it, at least from what's out there now. It's a lot more, a lot more resources, a whole lot more resources than there have been in the past. Even myself just studying the language for about the past, I want to say about 6 or 7 years now, that I've pretty much been studying Amharic and other Ethiopic languages like Tigrinya, so on and so forth, the Gu'as, and really trying to get into a lot of Oromifa as well. But just my own subtle study, the outlets and platforms and other products that have been created just over that short little span of years, from about 5 to 10 years now. It's a lot more that is available at this point, because mostly when I started, I only had 1 or 2 people that I really could turn to actually even begin learning these languages and even find out that they were, available to study, as critically as I have sought to do at this moment. So ones are very blessed just to live in this time where there are so many content creators and product creators as well at this point in time, in this day and age, to where they're, of course, fortunate enough to, just maybe just turn on the computer or go to the library and find, many books or many pieces of literature or many software devices or many apps and applications, so on and forth, that really will get them started and get the proverbial ball rolling, or really just get one's, initiated and started in certain things as this, not only this language, but other languages as well. So just to put that out there for ones as well, just starting out, sticking to that point, starting out at languages like the Arabic or the modern Hebrew, so to speak, even today. And I keep saying modern Hebrew because there's such a differentiation between the Hebrew over the years and over the centuries that, until you really start to study the Hebrew from a very critical standpoint, you really won't understand until you're actually already studying it. It's a thing that will really come to you over time. So just to put that out there, and hopefully ones will get a chance to check those aspects out as well, and kind of expand their knowledge on linguistical studies, phonetics, and tonal languages as well. And really, it'll more so come together if you ever come again to this video log. But of course, again, just keeping a mention again here, and in similar fashion to our first 2 installments, as we mentioned, the isim, the shim, or the given name here in perspective, Ethiopically would be known as the sim. And again, as I mentioned, if you're viewing this, of course, vid and this presentation on YouTube, you'll be able to more so differentiate and make comparisons with the writing systems as well here amongst these three Semitic or Afro-Semitic languages. And again, as I mentioned, in tone and phonetics and linguistic simile, you find that in comparison, these three languages make a very interesting triune and more so a correlation between the three. And of course, sim, of course, meaning name, which can be spelled two different particular ways, but not so much particular, still having the same equivalent in tone and phonetics. You know, you really understand that once you really kind of piece all three of these languages together, and you kind of hear within each a very distinct sound, but very similar for all three. So the sim, of course, will be the equivalent Ethiopically in the Amharic or the Amharic language for the given name or the first name of one. It always begs the point that the given name is always the first name heard, especially from the Eastern Hemisphere, and ones will know it as the first name, of course, here in the West. You know, the name that you're usually given at birth. So just to keep that in mind for ones, and remembering that we have a particular naming system that is completely different, but has its own similarities to the Western English naming system as well. So moving on to our second name, or our indication, or more so to say attribute, is the Kitzel. The Kitzel, Ethiopically speaking, in the Amharic language. And so again, hearing the phonetics, the tone, you know, you really have to see this vid and really kind of make your comparisons, or if ones are very, you know, listening savvy, I guess you can say, or really have a keen sense of hearing, you'll be able to, you know, kind of hear what I'm saying and search it out, or, you know, maybe do a Google search, Bing, or, you know, whatever search engine ones are, you know, familiar with or utilize at this time. But here, just in the viewing, you'll be able to see, of course, the relation between the writing system of the Arabic and Hebrew, as well as in the Arabic, the name, or this honorific or nickname, we would say, was the kunya, and in the Hebrew, of course, the kanoi, or the kanui. So again, just hearing that same phonetical circular motion that takes us throughout these three languages, and puts everything really into perspective, and you really kind of see that these languages don't only have their differences, but their similarities, in a sense to where it's almost, you have three people saying the same thing, but saying it from their own perspective. Always kind of look at it from that perspective. It's also, you know, even we see the initial and very familiar space and time where we have many English speakers that have their own perspectives on speaking the English language, you know, and, you know, we'll actually revisit that on the tail end of this video, just to give a little more context to what we're speaking here. So just again, just sticking to the point and staying on topic, as we have the third attribute, or the third name, in which more so would be an equivalent to a last name, but having its own, of course, differentiation pinpoint as well. The nasab in the Arabic and in the Hebrew the equivalent comes to the Nakhala. But Ethiopically in the Amharic, we would more so call this the Neged, or the Yenegedu Sim. As from the second name, the fullness of it would have been the Yekitzel Sim. Kitzel being the more so important link that you really need to pay more so attention to. That's more so the noun or the object of that entire phrase that is the focus point. Though sim is name, we are actually making a adjective a noun on that particular phrase. So kitzel really being the phrase that ones would have to pay attention to, but more so for this third and similar fashion, this third name or attribute or identifier, neged, yenegedu sim, neged being the name or the adjective or the adjective noun, the identifier here in this phrase that more so pinpoints what type of name this actually is. So neged, of course, giving that sense of the pedigree, the lineage, the inheritance, the name which is usually taken from the father or the mother. In this sense, as Ethiopically and in the Hebrew as well, ones don't simply use their patrilineal names or the names of their fathers and grandfathers to, of course, name their children or take that name on for their last name or their second name in this perspective. So really interesting point in that in and of itself alone, that in the Hebrew and the Ethiopic languages, and specifically here for the Amharic, there's a similar identifier in the naming system to where it's not only a patronymic name, but also a matronymic name as well. So it can be interchangeable, even so to speak, amongst the children, as a son could also carry his mother's name, just as a daughter could carry her father's name for her last name. But even coming so upon marriage, ones don't change their last names. They usually keep the name that they have from birth until they're passing from this world. So no changing of the last name, ladies. No, again, we speak on so many points and a lot of things that, going out here in the world that continue to play its part, in this, this, I guess you could say, elementary battle between the sexes in certain circles of discussion, which is completely silly to, one like myself. It just doesn't make sense. But aside from the point, as we digress from that, here Ethiopically and in the Hebraic language, ones don't change their names, of course. They don't change their names also in the Arabic as well, but as we know, most of the names tend to be more patrilineal in the Arabic. But in the Hebrew and the Ethiopic language of Amharic, as well as many other Ethiopic languages, ones usually don't change their last names. So it's a matter that usually is understood that one has joined to a certain household. Maybe another name is added to one, but usually young women would be addressed in the form which is equivalent to a miss or a young lady. A young woman who's unmarried would be wazarit. That would be your equivalent to addressing a woman properly in the formal sense as miss. But you wouldn't say a last name following wazarit. You would just say the given name, the simu. You would say wazarit Mariam or wazarit Zelek. Certain things of that nature, just to be formal, to be proper, to address, a certain young lady, and there in the square or in the marketplace, so on and so forth, to be quote unquote respectful. Honestly, just to be, one showing decorum. That's how you would address a young lady who is unmarried. Now, for a woman that is married, or even so a young woman to an older, sophisticated lady who is married and more than likely has children, you usually would address them as wezero. Wezero. Wezero would be your equivalent to Mrs. The abbreviation that usually comes MRS, period. But again, not changing the last name of a esteemed woman, or a woman who, of course, has joined to another family through her husband. Usually, Wezero would be named in the similar fashion as Wezerit. You would address a woman formally and properly as Wezero Mariam, in similar fashion to Wezerit. So just an interesting point there. Just I had to make sure that I put that in for one, so that they will know that, because I don't think that we actually spoken on that point at all throughout the entire series. Now, of course, in the Hebrew, it tends to be a little different at certain aspects as well. Mrs. would be, more so in the Hebrew, Gebret. Gebret would be the equivalent for Mrs. Now, Miss in the Hebrew wouldn't change so much in the Hebrew. It would more so stay the same for the Hebrew. So that is a matter of study that ones will have to come across for themselves and really, deal with in certain aspects. Now, with the Arabic for just addressing a young woman formally, would be Anessa. Anessa would be the equivalent for a young unmarried woman, respectfully. And also for a woman of esteem, a woman who is married or married with children, would be more so Madame Wazeil. And so you'll actually get a chance to see that here. And it sounds like the French also with Mademoiselle. Yeah, you would hear that, but of course the Arabic being much older, and some would say that, it comes from the French, but it can't come from the French if the French wasn't spoken until after the Arabic was already being spoken thousands of years before. So it's a matter of a certain common sense that ones have to come to, and again, research is the key in really searching these things out. And also with Mademoiselle, Madame as well, from the as used in the French per se, as the Arabic had a large influence not only over the French but also the Spanish language as well. So you'll see a lot of those correlations, when you're actually going through your studies, because that's the thing that I mentioned so much from just studying languages themselves. It's an interesting study. You really get really deep into a lot of things which you probably wouldn't have known unless you actually begun these studies for yourself. So just to put that out there, and also leave as another side note, for whomever may come across this channel, aside from those whom it was directed to specifically, especially my Rastafari brothers and sisters, the Black Jews, Black Hebrews, and so on and so forth, Judeo-Christians, etc. I really sought to just put this together for ones who, were having trouble learning the language and learning how to apply it in certain manners. So it was, a responsibility I put on myself, really to put together, and also going through certain personal things myself, and seeing the need for it to come forward at this point. Definitely seeking to, put together more comprehensible studies, comprehensible work, and, disseminate it as such, of course, for ones to have and to keep for themselves, so that they can always go through it, and refresh themselves whenever they feel like they're losing a bit of grounds on certain things, especially when speaking the language, because speaking languages, it's definitely a practice thing. It's something that you can't, put down for too long before, much time sets in. You'll realize that, certain things that you did know at one point, you start to lose them at a certain aspect. But in many aspects, it's still like riding a bike in comparison. Once you I'll go through it to a certain extent, you always kind of have it within you to do so. Just to keep that in mind as well, and I always have that, something to sit on the brain for a moment for us to think about. But again, as I mentioned from the earlier kind of segue I had mentioned about speaking, even so, how you see these phonetical and tonal languages of the Afro-Semetic amongst the Arabic and the Hebrew and the Ethiopic. You see how, in comparison, it more so shows three people in a scenario speaking the same language or saying the same thing from a different perspective. It's almost like they're, in one country on different sides of the country, or from different geographical locations in one place. As to comparison as English speakers over here in the West, as you have English speakers from England or the UK, the United Kingdom, or Scotland or Ireland, so to speak. You also have English speakers here in the United States, and also there in Canada as well. Some may speak a little more British English, or the King's English, they would say, quote unquote, and has its perspective, its tone, and ones usually can readily identify it to a certain extent, and you also have many ones from the Caribbean and many parts of Latin America who speak English as well, and it's their first language. This is a point that I'm trying to make in comparison with much of these Afro-Semitic languages as well. But even amongst the Caribbean peoples, they have, what they would call patois. But they're still speaking English. Believe it or not, they're still speaking English. It may be broken at certain points, and rearranged at certain instances where ones really can't understand them unless they've been in practice of hearing that language and speaking that language. I really don't want to call it a language. It's more so a dialect. It's pretty much, where you pick up certain things from your specific geographical location. So, sometimes one from the Caribbean may have trouble understanding or comprehending what's being said by one from the States, and the same from one from the States speaking to one from Europe or Ireland or Scotland or the United Kingdom. So you have your congruencies and your differentials amongst these dialects, but everyone is speaking English. You ask every last one of these people, what language do you speak? And they say they're speaking English. So I see a very similar notion, and so the same in the Afro-Semitic languages, particularly of the Arabic, the Hebrew, and the Amharic, because they very much have a common root. I would say, still doing more study on it myself before I really can bring that out. But I mean, even here, just amongst this study and these three installments that we have put together for once, to see that you can see a very, 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 very large common thread amongst these three languages. So, hopefully this has been informative, especially for ones of our affinity, our walk and trod amongst the Rastafari, beit Israel, Ethiopian Hebrews. But, for anyone who would come and check this out, hopefully ones have been, enlightened to a certain extent, not only to study these things further, but also to take what's been presented here and, really receive it in a manner that's not only acceptable for themselves, but just fruitful and use it, wisely.